All right, today for the liberation of Gabriel King, we're going to be doing it as a shared reading. So I'm going to be reading it to you, stopping at different points to kind of think aloud or ask you some questions instead of you reading it independently today. So chapter 3 is titled A Punch in the Nose. Now, just looking at the title, it's clear to see that the author is setting us up for a moment of tension. Remember, we're thinking about how characters react in times of conflict. We call these uh-oh moments. Those moments reveal something about the character. So just based on the title of this chapter, A Punch in the Nose, we know we're going to be saying uh-oh quite a few times in this chapter. Now, before we start reading, I want to point out there is a word in this chapter that we know we don't use. However, sometimes authors use certain words to get a point across. So we're going to experience that in this chapter. And I'm sure a lot of us, either we ourselves or maybe a friend or a family member, has been called a name before, whether we know it or not. Maybe names like Shorty, Goody Two-Shoes, or maybe even loser. Usually they sting a little. They kind of hurt when someone calls you a name. But we move on. We learn to ignore the haters and the bad people out there. Unfortunately, there are other names that sting a little more because they're deeply rooted in hate for someone based on their race or their gender, their culture, their abilities, or their ethnicity. So that's what we're going to experience in this chapter today. So before we begin, I want to make you aware that this chapter paints the picture of someone who uses that kind of language towards another character. What's worse is that it's an adult interacting with a child. The author does not want us to use this language as it's offensive and hurtful. Okay? At first, I wondered why the author would include a word like this in a children's book. And then I realized realistic fiction, which is what we're reading, is based on real life. And in real life, evil people exist. These people say horrible things, maybe because it's the kind of thinking that was taught to them when they were young, or maybe because they've been hurt themselves, or maybe because they're just mean people. But these are just my theories. Okay? So we are going to begin reading chapter 3, A Punch in the Nose, and you can certainly follow along with me in your book. Once Frida found me under the picnic table, she knew exactly what had happened. "Did Duke Evans and Frankie Carmen do this to you?" she asked, setting down her certificate and class picture so she could untie my shirt sleeves. "Yep," I said. Frida shook her head. "I knew I should have come looking for you as soon as you didn't line up. But Miss Murray said, 'Don't you move, Frida Wilson,' and I thought for sure you'd show up. But don't worry, Gabe. I'm going to liberate you from this situation, and then we're going to take care of business. Just you wait." Liberate was a word I should have known because Frida said it before. But right then I couldn't think of exactly what it meant. Only from the look on Frida's face I guessed it meant trouble. So based on the context of Frida using the word liberate, what does it mean to liberate? It kind of also sounds like another word we might be familiar with, a word we say almost all the time in the Pledge of Allegiance: liberty. Discuss the meaning of liberating, liberation, liberty with your learning coach. What does that mean? "I can't believe they made you miss moving up day," Frida said, her eyes burning like hot coals. "Don't matter," I told her. "I'm not moving up anyway. I decided it." It was as if a cloud passed over Frida's face. She looked at me, and her brow scrunched into a V. "What do you mean you're not moving up?" she said. "They called your name, so you've got to." "Nope," I said. "I've made up my mind." Frida frowned. You can't stay behind, she said. We got to be in the same grade. Otherwise, who will you play with? Won't be anyone to pass notes with, or to pick each other for teams. Who will help you with your math? And who will eat my Brussels sprouts on chicken and biscuits day? I thought it over. Frida did have a point. Back before the interrogating, life sure had been plain. A teacher had even written on my report card in kindergarten, "Gabe seems lonely and needs to make some friends." I couldn't go to school without Frida. "Why don't you stay back with me?" I suggested. But Frida wrinkled her nose and pretended like I hadn't said that. "You'll love 5th grade. Just try it," she said, instead using her whiniest, most pleading voice. But I thought about Duke and Frankie, and I knew Frida was wrong. I'd broken my pinky swear because of them. I shook my head. "Nope," I said. "I'll just get beat up every day, so I might as well stay back. I'd rather be alive in 4th grade than dead in 5th grade." Frida stomped her foot. "They won't get you," she said. "I promise." "Oh, yeah?" I asked. "How are you going to promise that?" "You'd have to pay them all the money in the world." Frida stuck her stuff under one arm and grabbed my elbow. "No, I won't," she said. "Come on." My stomach twisted into a knot. "What are you going to do? Are you going to tell Miss Murray? Don't you think we should find my pop first?" But Frida wasn't listening. Sometimes she's like a locomotive. There's no stopping her until she wants to be stopped. She dragged me where the punch and cookies were set up, and I didn't make a lick of difference that I was trying to run the other way. "I'm going to do what Terrence taught me," Frida said. "And don't you worry about getting in trouble. This is justified on account of what they did to you." So I'm going to stop right here. Another word similar to one we hear in the Pledge of Allegiance. Justice. That's another word for fair. Let's read to see what Frida thinks is fair and just. Justified. I wondered if justified was anything like terrified. Probably was if it was something Frida had learned from her older brother. Terrence was 18, and when it came to pounding, he was an expert. He kept 5 different punching bags in his basement of their house. There were big ones as tall as he was, tiny ones the size of someone's head, and there was one in the corner that was exactly my size. One time, me and Frida snuck down there when we thought no one was home. Only then we'd heard Terrence's feet coming down the steps. Clunk, clunk, clunk. He didn't see us at first, and started punching that little bag 100 times a second. I breathed in real sharp by accident, and that's when he turned around and saw us under the stairwell. First I screamed, then Frida screamed. Then Terrence chased us clean out of the house. I hadn't gone back into her basement since. So if Frida was going to pull something she'd learned from Terrence, that could only mean one thing. Trouble. "You know, my mama will be wondering where I am," I said real quick. "We'd better find her before we do anything else." I searched the crowd, and right then Frida caught sight of Duke, and that's when things got crazy. "Just see if anyone picks on you again after this," Frida says. She let go of my arm, marched straight up to Duke, drew back her fist, and before anyone could take a breath, she punched him smack in the nose. Duke toppled back, knocking over the punch bowl, and Frida dove after him. She was rearing back to punch him again when Frankie tackled her from the side. All around me people were gathering in, pushing and yelling, and I was frozen solid. "Fight! Fight! Get her! You kids stop that!" Everything was happening at once, and before I could blink, there was a slew of adults pulling everyone apart, and my pop was one of them. He dragged Frida off Duke, but took 2 other guys to help because she kept swinging her arms like cyclones. So if Frida is acting like a cyclone, think a cyclone like a tornado, swing her arms all around in circles, she must be really upset with Duke and really committed to getting revenge. Do you agree? So I'm asking now, she's getting revenge for what Duke and Frankie did to Gabe. Was her action of punching him in the nose justified? Duke got to his feet and stood next to his pop. His nose was dripping blood, and his clothes were all soaked in fruit punch, and he was sniffling real hard, like he was trying not to cry. Then his pop yelled, "You got beat up by a nigger girl?" Hi. So this is where I told you we were going to hear that word that we know we don't use. But the author actually intentionally developed these characters through the dialogue so that we could begin to empathize with Frida, meaning we can feel what she feels. So let's see how Frida reacts to this. Right now, I have a theory about Frida. She seems bold and confident, but will this racist comment break her lively spirit? Let's keep reading and find out. The whole crowd went silent as soon as he said that. Even Frida stopped swinging and her eyes popped. My breath came out like someone had punched me in the gut, and I looked around to see who would yell at Mr. Evans for saying that. But all the adults were looking at the ground, shuffling their feet. Then Pop stepped up. "You best not use that word," Pop said. He said it steady and quiet, like he was just about everything, but I could tell he meant business. "You talking to me?" Mr. Evans asked, looking down. Pop is short like me. He's shorter than all the other adults. But he didn't back away. "Yes, I am." Mr. Evans moved like he might put up his fists, but he looked around at all the faces in the crowd. Then he spat on the ground instead. It was hot and dry, so the spit sat at Pop's feet like a challenge. Then Mr. Evans grabbed Duke by the elbow. "Come on," he said real gruff. He nodded into the crowd to Frankie's Pop, and they took off. Our teacher, Mrs. Murray, was trying to say something to them about their boys fighting, but they didn't even stop to listen. Only Duke stopped long enough to look back over his shoulders. His eyes narrowed into teeny slits, and there was much hate in them. I could read exactly what his mind was saying. "I'm gonna get you. Just wait." So let me read those last 2 sentences again. "I'm gonna get you. Just you wait." So I think the author might be doing a little foreshadowing or leaving the readers a clue for some events that are upcoming in this book. Right, and that was the end of chapter 3.